this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
So you're looking to sell your business? My guess is you're actually not. My guess is that you'd like to know that you could sell your business down the road, but right now you're busy building it. And if that's the case, standard operating procedures can be your secret sauce. These are the documents that you need to show your employees how to do their work. And we've just developed a new ebook. You can get it at builttosell.com/SOP. I think you're going to like this episode. It's with a guy named Prantik Mazumdar, who built a digital marketing agency called Happy Marketer. What a great name. He describes a lot of the mechanics of selling, some of the legalese of selling, how to deal with an earnout. In particular, if you run a service company, buckle up, because this episode is packed with real life lessons and business insights from somebody who's been there and done that. I think you're going to really like this. He talks about something called acquisition readiness, and in particular, the 4 attributes Prantik looked at to make sure he was acquisition ready. So listen for that. The beginning, they use customers to finance their business as opposed to getting investment from private equity or venture capitalists. Great lesson there for folks who want to hang on to equity, which I'm sure you do. He'll also talk about how he used partners like Boston Consulting Group and Google to instantly give his company credibility. He'll talk about timing your exit and how to think through that. Again, lots to choose from in this episode, in particular, some of the sticky details around earnouts, which are a great wisdom here that you're about to listen to from Prantik Mazumdar. Prantik Mazumdar. How did I get that? Did I get it right?
Absolutely. Spot on. Thanks, John.
Hit it out of the park. Nice to meet you. It's great. I've heard a little bit about your company. We did a little bit of back and forth before we got started. So it's great to welcome you to Built to Sell Radio. Thank you for doing it.
And it's a pleasure. I've been hearing a few episodes and I'm so glad we could meet and we can do this.
So for folks who don't know Happy Marketer, describe the company that you started. What did you guys do?
Yeah, it's been 12 years since we started Happy Marketer. Rachit, the original founder, and myself, we happened to go a long way back. So literally 20 years ago when we stepped into Singapore, we met each other on day one in our lives in Singapore. We were university batchmates, but our lives took very different paths. After college, he's the true blue entrepreneur. He kind of actually stuck it out. He did different things to pay the bills. So before the 12 years, there's actually a good 4-5 year story where he tried his hand at various things from website design, logo building, etc. And in the parallel, I took the safer route, to be honest. I joined the Singapore Civil Service. I worked with startups on the other side, helping facilitate their growth and internationalization. I then worked with a couple of small startups or SMEs in the brand marketing and digital marketing space before Rachit and I got together and we said, hey, I'm doing something similar. Let's join hands and build this. I guess the interesting part of the story in retrospect is both of us are not marketing trained. Both of us don't have marketing degrees. And I think that worked out really well because we genuinely believe that being misfits in the industry, because we came from a tech and data background, albeit a bit prior to data-driven marketing became the flavor of marketing in itself. I think that kind of helped us. So when we began, it was all about building websites, doing the analytics, driving search engine optimization, doing the tech geeky stuff, which at least marketers back then weren't doing. So we were early in the game. We were different just by design or by our background. And yeah, that's how the journey started. Long story short, we'll obviously deep dive into various aspects, but pure services business, bootstrap. Our belief was always that the best money raised is money from customers. So we had no debt. We had obviously no venture capital. No one was going to look at a services business. And we kept pivoting and experimenting. So over the 12 years of our life, we started off purely as an agency without even knowing what an agency was, like I said, because we didn't come from the marketing industry. But thereafter, we pivoted to a training company. As in, when I say pivot, we didn't completely pivot. We added that as a business unit. Training was fantastic. Eventually, we set it up as a subsidiary called Future Marketer. So Happy Marketer implemented, Future Marketer trained. And then we had a third sort of a pivot where we added consulting, digital transformation, where we went beyond marketing. And then we started looking at digital as a lever to kind of transform various aspects of your business. And the common thread amongst all of this is we did this with the help of partners. So in our 12-year journey, a lot of it was on the back of or on the shoulders of giants like Google, Salesforce, Boston Consulting Group. And that was a game changer for us. So
Google, I know you're one of the big Google Analytics trainers. And so when you talk about partnerships, you're talking about that, where you trained other SMEs on how to use Google Analytics, how to analyze their website, and you'd been certified to do that through Google. Is that right?
That's how it started. Absolutely right. So, Google, everyone obviously knows, we as consumers, we use Google, the search engine, or Gmail, for example. But 95% of their business revenue comes from ads, right? So in our market, there are dime a dozen advertising partners. So we were one of those dime a dozen advertising partners. But the three other areas where we partnered Google, and we still do till date, is one is analytics, like you said. So we are one of the two Google Analytics 360 resellers and partners. We're the largest in Singapore and Philippines. But there are two other areas. One is training. So we train people across all sorts of Google products, G Suite, SEO, SEM, you name it. And the fourth is, which is their burgeoning, their fastest growing unit right now, is the Google Cloud. Is how do you kind of take Google Cloud and build marketing use cases such as predictive marketing. So most of analytics is typically rear view mirror. What did my customers do? What did they read? But now with Google Cloud, I can look ahead. I can predict, this particular customer is likely to churn. So let me give them a promo. But, John's a loyal customer. Let me not waste a promo dollar. Let me take him into my loyalty program. So it's that entire gamut. And we happen to be their largest partner in Southeast Asia for sure.
Love the partnership with Google. Obviously, that gives you credibility as well, instant credibility because of the Google brand. What was the relationship with Boston Consulting Group?
Yeah, so around 2015, 2016, we started connecting. They reached out saying, look, we are driving a lot of digital transformation, large-scale transformation programs with family-owned businesses in Southeast Asia. Now, if you look at Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, most emerging markets typically have anywhere between 5 to 10 family businesses that pretty much run the country. That's the case in Indonesia, in Philippines. So it started.
The booze, the media,
everything. There is a joke that you land at an airport, the airport's by them, the plane's by them, the petrol's by them, the roads are by them, right? So they were working with a very large, I believe the second or third largest family-owned business in the Philippines. And they said, look, we're helping this massive group figure out how best to collect and centralize data. How do we leverage data across the group? How do we activate data? How do we drive marketing automation? So they said, look, whilst we're doing all of that, we need domain experts who can actually walk the talk and convert PowerPoints to profitability. So we were their domain experts. So this was not a subcontracting deal. We struck a deal where we said, look, we need to have a seat at the table. We need to hear customers and their pain points, and we'll implement. So that's how the partnership began. And it's been mega fruitful. I mean, at least for us, because we have their brand, their credibility. We could latch onto their pricing model. It took away a huge amount of our sales costs because they were doing the heavy lifting of sales and account management. We were there to understand and implement. And even for our staff, just to have the opportunity to work with a tier one consulting firm, learn the rigor of the consulting process was, that part of the benefit is hard to quantify, but I think was gigantic.
Prantik, I want to ask you about specifically those partnerships and how they were viewed by your ultimate acquirer, Dentsu. So let's get into that. When Dentsu was into your business and really trying to understand it, what was the reaction to learning about the Google partnership, the Boston Consulting Group partnership?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it did two things. Firstly, I think it's probably one of the reasons why a large entity or a conglomerate like Dentsu even got to know about us. Because during that partnership, especially the training element of the partnership, by the time we got acquired, we must have trained at least, 5,000 odd marketers in the region, including staff from Dentsu. So, they had seen us, they had experienced us, right? So I think the partnership definitely helped the visibility, pre-acquisition. But I think when it came to acquisition, it kind of helped these partnerships lend credibility. They could do some reference check as to, are these guys real? Do they do their job well? I think fundamentally, two other points that I would add is when they started looking at the P&L, what they also realized is there is a tangible value that these partnerships add, is the fact that a lot of our sales and marketing was happening through these partners. So we were able to take off those line items from our cost structure. Because, if Google recommends us, anyway, there's a 50% chance of us kind of, making the deal. So we realized we didn't need to have additional sales folks. So it was a huge combined benefit when Dentsu looked at these.
But I guess the other side of the coin that Dentsu could have looked at was if this partnership fades away, breaks up, doesn't make the transition over to Dentsu, then Happy Marketers' easy sort of funnel of new deals dries up. Did they have that conversation directly? Did they put a covenant or some sort of legal protection in there about that?
Yeah. And, fundamentally, that's a risk of any services organization, because at the end of the day, we are all about our people and our relationships, right? So we had that conversation across the board that, how many of our staff comes over. Obviously, we put our foot down saying one of our biggest non-negotiables was no one gets touched, because at the end of the day, we put in a lot of heart in our business. There were people who have kind of committed 5, 7, 10 years. So people was one. The other is, yes, whatever was contractually agreed, obviously we had to kind of serve those clients and partners. But I think they baked in that risk that there could be a possibility that post-acquisition, these relationships don't fly. Touch wood, it hasn't happened that way. But what matters also is the fact that if you just under the hood, I think we got to look at the structure of the acquisition. So the entity that was really interested in buying us is a Dentsu subsidiary called Merkle, which is started 30 years out of Baltimore. So if you look at the Dentsu story, the reason we were of interest to them is because Dentsu is a 120-year-old ad agency network. It's the only network that went east to west. It was a creative powerhouse which acquired Aegis, the media company in the UK in 2012. And then they went to the US to acquire Merkle. Now, Merkle is more like an Accenture than a ad agency. So in fact, when we connected with Merkle, it felt like we were mini Merkle because they were data-driven, very much into analytics, CRM, loyalty. And they are huge partners. They have a huge partner ecosystem with Google, Salesforce, Adobe. So when they looked at it, they were like, wow, this seems like a great, there are a lot of parallels. This is probably mini Merkle in Southeast Asia. And that helped us as well because we knew that given the way Merkle manages alliance partners, we knew that this would be a good fit because they would understand how this business model works. So I think Dentsu got a lot of comfort just looking at the parallels between Merkle globally and Happy Marketer in Southeast Asia.
Interesting. So let's get into the actual acquisition itself since we're there. How big did you get your company before you wanted to sell, like in terms of number of employees or whatever proxy you want to use for size?
Yeah. So I think, we were, to be honest, when Rachit and I started the business, the intention was never to sell, right? Our intention we idolized services business that scaled to $1 billion. So both of us having grown up in India, Indonesia, Singapore, back in the 90s or early noughts, we always looked up to IT services companies like the Tatas, the Wipros, the Capgeminis, etc. So, we actually had a business plan which said, over 30 years, can we get to $1 billion, right? That was the original game. But in 2017, 2018, we got approached, we got connected with a gentleman called Ted Bray, who was leading Merkle in APAC. So that's how the acquisition conversation got seeded, because when we met Bray, he was very open. He said, look, I'm here to grow Merkle through acquisition because no one knows Merkle. There is no Merkle. So he had picked up a company in India, a couple of deals in Australia, and he was very, very clear that he wanted to work with Happy Marketer in Southeast Asia. So that's how the conversation started. But it took us a while for us to get convinced that we are acquisition ready. And this is something I would want to tell the audience, that it's important to be acquisition ready and not just sell just because someone approaches. Because we've kind of fielded acquisition offers since 2013, 2014. So when we looked at the market, we realized that most of the successful deals or most large deals happened when agencies had crossed about $5 million in this region. So I think the first threshold in revenue, that's right, in revenue. So the threshold that we wanted to cross was at least 5 million in billings and revenue. So when we decided that I think that we want to kind of go down this path, we were inching towards that double digit in terms of revenue, and in terms of staff.
Sorry, what do you mean by double digit?
So about double digit in millions, about $9 to $10 million range. So we wanted to hit that. Yeah, we wanted to hit that in this part of the world, which again is rare because most agencies, if I look typically again in Singapore, I think I would say 5 to 6 million is a sweet spot, is a time when founders start either looking at new founders to take the business ahead or start looking at acquisition offers. But we wanted to stretch that a bit. Next was about staff. So at the point of acquisition, we were 55 people. And it was, I think we as a business, we were structured with about half of those folks in India. That's where our delivery center always has been. And the remaining others were in Singapore and Southeast Asia. So 50 plus was a good size to be at in terms of a fairly decent org size that could support a post-acquisition business. So that's where we wanted to get at, John, in terms of just being ready. So we wanted to have good partnerships. We wanted to have, obviously, a strong pipeline. We wanted to have a near double-digit revenue business and about 50 plus people.
Got it. Partnerships pipeline, 10 million plus and 50 people. That was sort of your definition for acquisition ready.
Yeah.
Got it. That's super helpful. And in terms of the equity partners, Rachit, it was your partner and original founder. And then anyone else at the table on the equity side, or just the two of you?
No, that's a good one. So, so prior to the acquisition conversation, it was 60-40 Rachit and me. But there are two other partners in the business, Avdesh and Sanchit, who have been with us for a long time. So Sanchit has been there for a decade. Avdesh has been there for about 5-7 years. And if the acquisition had not happened, they were on path to equity anyway. But as we kind of approached the acquisition conversation, we decided it's only fair that we have the equity transition as well. So prior to acquisition, as we prepared the deal structure, we kind of brought them onto the equity structure as well, so that they have a skin in the game. Because in a services business, there is a earn-out component. So we wanted to ensure that Sanchit and Avdesh are heavily incentivized to kind of take the journey forward. And it's worked out pretty well. Today, we've transitioned fairly well. Sanchit's the current CEO of Happy Marketer. Avdesh is the Chief Operating Officer. So Rachit and I have kind of, over the years, passed on the baton to Sanchit and Avdesh.
Fantastic. What was Ted's posture when he first approached you? So he was pretty candid. He kind of said, I'm looking to acquire companies. You guys look like a good one. I mean, where did it go from there?
Yeah, over a couple of sangrias, he made it very clear that not only was he here to acquire, he wanted to acquire us specifically. But I think what I really appreciated about Ted was two things. I think A, the upfront candor, B, a slower approach. He was very quick to get to the point, but he said, look, I understand these things take time. And to be honest, year one was a lot about Rachit, me, and the team sleeping over the idea. We were not acquisition ready. We were just not even emotionally sure that we wanted to go down this path since we had larger ambitions. And Ted
You
figured
just
that.
said
And I
year
think-
one, and a lot of people said, wait, it takes more than a year to sell a company? Are you kidding me? I thought it was
Holy
weeks or months. Year one of your courting by Ted, you're talking about.
that's
How many
the
years
name of
total
this-
was the courting?
That's the name of this episode, year one of the courting with Ted Bray. It took us 2 years from courting to signing the deal on Feb 19th or Feb 20th, 2019. So to be honest, it could take a month to 3 months. But I would tell you this, that I think, one of the biggest, and this may sound like a philosophical cliche, but one of the biggest lessons we learned is the best time to sell is when you don't have to or don't want to sell. So I think if you don't want to sell, time is on your hand. You can shop around because this is the founder's baby. You've put in heart, sweat, blood, mortgage, everything into it, right? So you want to get this right. You'd rather take your time. So in our 2-year period, year one, I would put it as us being confused, acting pricey perhaps, or being naive because we didn't know what this would mean. Year two is where the heavy lifting of financial numbers and legal negotiations took place. So yeah, for people listening, it could, I'm not saying it does, it could take up to 2 years.
Prantik, a lot of people are wondering about selling right now. I mean, either getting approached by private equity groups or getting approached by strategics. And, hopefully after knock wood, this pandemic is beyond the worst of it. It's been an emotional toll for a lot of business owners. And I think a lot are thinking, okay, maybe now's the time. It sounds like you guys did some heavy soul searching, you and Rachit in particular, but also the two other partners. Help people understand how you worked through the decision to sell. It took a year. What was that journey like for you? Like, what were the conversations? How did you get there to the decision that yes, it's time?
Yeah. So, after that first sangria conversation, there were a few more. I don't think Rachit and I were convinced that, we were acquisition ready. But on Ted's part, on Merkel's part, I think what was really good was they took it slow, right? So the courting was slow. We dated many times. I think we even started doing partnerships, project partnerships. He said, look, let's work on a few projects. Why don't I get to know your people? Why don't you get to know my people? Let's have joint conversations. That really, really helped. It really helped that Ted Ted's a sales guy. And so I think he knew that if he could open doors and show us actual deal value, obviously it would be exciting. So that was one. Next is, I think their posturing was great in terms of, there were a couple of occasions when we had the opportunity to meet the founding team of Merkel. So David Williams, and their story is fascinating because, they kind of grew from zero to $1 billion when they sold to a Dentsu over 30 years. And it all started from Baltimore and, from a small little team, it kind of grew up. So when we kind of met the founding team, I think they sold us the entrepreneur dream, the founder story, saying, guys, we get this, we've been there. We want to work together to help you accelerate growth. So I think the language, the posturing, that helped. The third was, when we looked at their framework, like I told you earlier, Rachit and I, because we come from the tech analytics background, we were always fascinated by the Wipros, the Accenture, the KPMG, the Deloittes, right? And when we saw Merkel, I think we saw a lot of alignment that, hey, you know what? Here is something very similar. So that, I think that those conversations were like, okay, you know what? We're not saying no. Let us kind of think this through. Then two other things, important things happened. We spoke to a few other founders who have had good and bad exits. And I tell you, we've learned a lot from those. I really would like to thank them for, opening their books. And there have been some very, very sour stories of earnout. So
like
we've
what?
got, I'll get to that. So I'll tell you a couple of sad stories. So one was, founder A runs a company for 10, 12 years, sells it to a very large network, but he doesn't negotiate the cost structure post-acquisition very well. And that was a big, big expensive lesson for him because, at the end of the day, if it's an earnout, typically earnout is a function of your profit after tax. So if you don't negotiate cost, a shrewd buyer post-acquisition could load you up with their cost structure, their expensive offices, their lawyers, their fancy technology and tools, and suddenly your profit could shrink, and the deal may have no meaning or value for you. So for folks listening, negotiating cost structure of your earnout is probably the most important thing. There's another case where...
In the case of entrepreneur A, did he or she walk away with nothing? Did they get some earnout? Did they negotiate some sort of settlement? Do you know any of the details?
Yeah. So typically the earnout process, the way it works is your company gets valued at X, and you get, again, depends on the deal, anywhere between 30 to 50% of X upfront. And this is another lesson, at least from our perspective, is another entrepreneur B, let's call him B. He said, look, even if you negotiate hard, push for a higher upfront, because again, the simple analogy, money in hand or money in bank, is obviously sacrosanct. So because you never know what happens after you earn out. So I would typically say, we negotiate on the overall valuation, of course, but negotiate how much you're going to get upfront. And if you can get a decent chunk that takes care of your life, I think you're at a much better place mentally. But thereafter, you also got to negotiate what's the tenure of the earnout. Typically, it can be anywhere between 2 to 5 years, usually. I think 3 is a sweet spot. Ours is 4. And you've got to be very, very clear as to what are the earnout components. What are the multiples? What are the revenue and profit targets? You got to negotiate as much as possible that you control your own costs. So these carve-outs are critical. So these are just 2 instances of, just conversations that were eye-opening. Rachit and I don't come from a financial background. So this was great insight. In hindsight, these are, deal makers or breakers. So we said, given how important this is, we wanted to hire a strong investment banker that does deals in our industry. And we went to the market, we scouted 3 or 4. We eventually decided to work with this company, a UK-based company which has a strong presence in Singapore, Hong Kong, called SI Partners. And I tell you, there are 3 things that they did for us. And without them, this deal wouldn't have been successful. One is they know what the industry wants at that point in time. So they are very good at shaping the narrative. And I can tell you, as with most things in life, it is so much about brand perception and narrative, right? You think of a Mercedes versus a Toyota. They're automobiles taking you from A to B. When you and I buy for example, if you buy a BMW, very unlikely that we're opening the hood and testing the engine, etc. We are there for the experience, for the narrative, right? For the prestige. So they were very good at figuring out what buyer A wants versus buyer B versus buyer C, and they would stitch our narrative accordingly. 2, they could take us to market. As you rightly said, there are various kinds of buyer, and we can I'll do the surface level and we can come back to this. Through the process of 2 years, we met agencies, which we eventually settled for, but we met private equity, we met consulting firms, we met individual family-owned businesses, we met high net worth individual businesses who had no interest in digital, but there are other reasons as to why they wanted to buy a company. So point being, if you're really selling, if you're selling a company you've built with your own hard effort, money and sweat, go to the market. Don't say no first. Just go and figure out what are the different buyers and business models out there, right? So that's again
a couple of things I want to drill in there.
Yeah,
a couple of things I want to drill in there. What was the narrative that SI Partners stitched together for you? I guess, let me ask you a different question. What was the most surprising way they changed the narrative? Like, how did you and Rachit present the company? And then what did they do to make it sound different to an acquirer?
Yeah, I think 2 fundamentally different things, right? I think the moment they saw us, I think, like I mentioned earlier, we were marketing misfits. So I think the very first thing they said is, look, we are not going to pitch you as an agency. Because the moment I pitch you as an agency, especially to agencies, there is a standard template. Agency, revenue X, profit Y, here's a multiple, here's an Excel sheet, let's go, right? But the reality was, if you looked under the hood of Happy Marketer, there were 3 business models blended together. There's an agency, a training company, and a consulting firm, as well as, here's what really changed the game. We have, as part of our Google partnership, we are a a software reseller company. We're official resellers of Google Analytics 360. Now, each of these 4 business models have different multiples. A software reseller has, that's like a SaaS business. The multiples are much higher. We strike a 5-year contract, and the margins are high. So suddenly a SaaS multiple applies.
What kind of multiple would you expect on that?
Yeah, on that could be anywhere between 10 to 12x, if not higher.
10 to 12 if you're, times EBITDA.
EBITDA, yeah. If you're on the pure agency side, it could be as low as 3 to 4, depending on what's out there in the market. Training helps. Training, because the cash flow is very good, because training is one of those business models where, just like in school, you're expected to pay before you enter class, right? In agency, you're struggling to chase your clients for 30, 60, 90 days even, right? So when we blended it, we kind of figured that there's a good narrative for maybe, a 7x of EBITDA, for example, right?
What would a typical training company trade at?
Probably around that, 7, 8x.
Got it.
If you're, yeah.
So the execution stuff, the kind of commoditized stuff, 3 to 4, the software 10 to 12, the training 7 to 8. So you're thinking blended, maybe 7x is a realistic, 7 times EBITDA is a realistic expectation.
Absolutely. And I think, so what happened was, the benefit of having that 2-year stretch, was philosophically, we were fine to walk away, and we have walked away from many deals. B, it gave us time to organically grow our revenue in the narrative, in the direction of the narrative that SI partners advised us. They said, guys, look, in the market right now, there are very few resellers, there are very few training businesses. So can we skew your business in the coming year in that direction, right? So we also use that time to kind of shape our business more and more towards the narrative of the sale.
I really want to just press pause and underline what you just said, because I think a lot of business owners, when they're approached by an advisor, whether it's an M&A professional or we call them certified value builders, regardless, advisors, they kind of give them the Heisman and say, you know what, I don't want to talk now. I'm not ready to sell, is the classic rebuttal, right?
Yeah.
And what you did is you sat with SI partners early. They coached you on what the different multiples are, how to position your business to increase the multiple, what was going to be more attractive to acquirers and less. I mean, that coaching sounds like it was incredibly valuable.
Spot on. And I'll tell you, you're very right to say that, when advisors approach you, in fact, many of them typically only work on a success fee. What I liked about SI partners in hindsight is it was a blended structure. We had a flat fee and a percentage of the overall deal. The reason that's beneficial is because automatically that's an alignment with the principle that you don't have to sell. And I can't tell you, and I can't emphasize enough. So there are 2 people, Sam and Hattie from SI Partners. After every meeting, they would categorically remind us, Rachit, Prantik, remember, you don't have to sell. Now, they wouldn't have been able to do that if it was a pure success fee. It's a very small thing, but it went miles because it just strengthened our confidence during negotiation. Because remember, in the negotiation, very likely it's a David Goliath situation, and the agency, the seller, is a small person. And I can tell you, in many, many cases, in many conversations that we've had in the market, companies, who buy regularly, it's their job to strike a good deal and to squeeze, your buying side, just like the way you're buying a house, you're always trying to negotiate, right? They're doing their job. But on the selling side, you've got to know your narrative. You've got to be confident. You've got to be okay to walk away or buy time, because that's your strength. And that only comes if you have partnerships that are structured and aligned that way. So to everyone listening, I would say being open to advisors because they know the market. Of course, you've got to be confident that they're the right guys. It really helps, because at the end, Rachit and I told ourselves that even if it didn't sell, we were happy paying the retainer because they really opened our eyes. They coached us. They changed the way our narrative looked. So yeah, absolutely.
Now,
I think
I'm curious about something because Ted had kind of romanced you guys. The sangria's flowing. He's a sales guy. And then all of a sudden you rock up and say, okay, we've engaged SI partners. What was Ted's reaction like to this? Now he's got to negotiate with these professionals. Suddenly,
Yeah,
He doesn't
like I
have
said,
so much access to you anymore.
no. So I think what we did was, we've always enjoyed speaking and talking with him, and that's the beauty of Ted. He's genuinely, he is very, very founder friendly, right? And he's a great salesman. So that combination, he knows that, look, if we really want to get this done, we've got to let the founders and happy marketer guys be comfortable, let them follow their process. So we still continued, working on projects, meeting for sangrias and drinks. All we said is, look, if we are going down this route, we will go through a professional. We will meet a few buyers. In fact, Ted comes from the tech world, from Oracle, Accenture, etc. So he said, look, if I were you, I would do the same. So he's a very, very empathetic person. So he said, look, guys, do this only if it makes sense. Go and speak to other buyers. And, that's the irony of that sort of dating is, you kind of get drawn to it when the other person is not kind of, pushing you too hard. So I thought the relationship with Ted, I think it's a huge part of why the deal happened. And I think we took it nice and slow, nice and easy. We kept the conversation open. He let us do our thing. Yeah.
How many offers did you end up getting, like formal letters of intent?
So, the way it works is, in most cases, at least in our case, is we could go to the market, we could field offers, but once we signed an LOI, a letter of intent, that's exclusive, right? So we wanted to ensure that before we signed an LOI, eventually, obviously with Dentsu and Merkle, because each process it's a tedious, long drawn due diligence process, and like I was sharing with you earlier, there's a huge emotional baggage because you're running a business by day and you got to do all of this by evening or night. So we said, look, we don't want to flirt with too many partners, but before that, we want to at least meet. So we met maybe, I don't know, about 10 odd serious potential buyers. We kind of got a sense of, are they interested, not interested? And if so, what the business model or the multiple is going to be like. To be honest, there were a couple of family-owned businesses from Indonesia, China, who probably had a much cleaner and larger deal structure. So there were two entities who wanted to buy us upfront at 2x of the offer that we finally had, from Dentsu, and but there was no earnout. So it's pretty interesting. So we were like, wow, here we have an offer where someone's willing to give us more money. Someone doesn't want us to have an earnout. Why are we not saying yes right away? It just doesn't sound intuitive. So we, again, Rachit and I sought for advice from some very senior VCs and PE firms saying, guys, you do this for a living. What's the catch? So yeah, I remember one of our senior VC friends saying, guys, look, if it's purely about math, even a grade 5 student can tell you that go with the offer that gives you more money. But he said, guys, ask yourself, why are you doing this? Ask yourself, what's the narrative or intent? So he said, look, typically in those deals, they would buy it. And the reason they are buying it is because they want to buy for two reasons. And those buyers were very candid. They said, look, some buyers said, look, by doing this, it allows us to put in wealth into Singapore, which is going to give us Singapore, a Singapore equivalent of a green card or a citizenship, right? So they were doing for personal reasons. They're wealthy families. They just wanted access to Singapore. And some other people were doing it to kind of create a amalgamation of companies, a package, and then list it on the market, right? So they were not really interested in helping us grow the business or, in what we have built. They were just doing it for pure commercial reasons. And nothing wrong because they were willing to pay a very good price for it. But what the advice for us was that, look, you guys are young. Chances are you might want to start, you might have another one or two businesses in you in the next 30 years. You want to have a good story. You want to have a good exit story. You also want to do right by your people. There are 60 people who have given their lives to you. Because if you sell to the larger, the parties who are going to give you more money, they'll shut the business on day one. All 55 lose their jobs, right? Do you want that narrative? So we thought very hard. And we felt, that's true. Yes, we can make more money there upfront. But I think there is a responsibility. There's a story that we want to build here. And through the earnout process, we do still have the opportunity to make it to that 2x valuation eventually. So we said, what? Time is in our hand. We'll choose the path of the earnout. So we fielded 10 odd offers, 3 different kinds of business model, but eventually we felt very comfortable with the Dentsu Merkle offer. Again, they were they have been very, very thorough and professional in the way they've gone about the business.
And so what was their structure? Like, what was the multiple they were offering, and how much of it upfront versus earn out, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so like I said, in our case, eventually the blended 7x of EBITDA kind of worked out, and the typical deal for us was, we get about 40-45% upfront, and the rest is obviously variable. It's a function of a 4-year earnout. It's a multiple, it's a PAT multiple. And so I guess the good thing is we kind of had visibility of the formula upfront. Obviously, the destiny is in our as well as in Dentsu Merkel's hands, because it's a joint business plan post earnout. It's not just Happy Marketer, but it's a collective effort. But at least we knew what we are getting into. We know the formula, and we've literally earned what we sow, sort of a thing. So,
did you say? I just want to make sure I understood. Did you say packed multiple?
PAT, P-A-T, profit after tax.
Profit after tax. Okay, that's helpful. Got it.
And again, this is not sacrosanct, right? There are different models we have seen in the market, which could be revenue-based, which could be profit before tax. Because again, the tax jurisdiction matters a lot, because Singapore is a low tax jurisdiction, right? But if you're in a high tax, maybe in the US or India, etc., you may want to negotiate otherwise. And that's again where it's critical. And these are details where you need advice. So apart from SI partners, we had an accounting firm that helped us on the tax accounting side. We had a very, very good law firm. Something, again, I would recommend all our listeners to consider. We finally got a law firm, which is a very big name in the US. They're a large law firm. We're lucky to have a friend there who helped us strike a deal, which was part retainer, because most law firms only work on a retainer. But we were lucky to get a part retainer, part success fee. But again, I can't stress the importance of that, because a lesson learned was, beyond a point, all the legal negotiations were not legalese, but literally posturing that, it's my word. This is how we do it. Take it or leave it. So you've got to be able to have a law firm that has a good standing, that has a good perception, that can hold its ground, and ideally, hopefully, precedence based on experience. And I can go into, if you're interested, go into a couple of clauses. Which,
go ahead.
So, for example, a couple of clauses that took a long time was, we want to negotiate very clearly and very hard on non-competes, because the buyer would typically say that, hey guys, you've sold your business. Now, ideally, for the rest of your lives, you're not going to be doing an agency, right? Now that's the extreme case. Most companies won't do it because the law of your country most likely will say that you can't prevent someone from earning his or her bread or butter. But they would probably put a large tenure, saying for the next 3, 5, 10 years, you can't do something, right? So again, thanks to our lawyers, we kind of created some carve out, saying, okay, you know what, at least for us, we can't be doing an agency selling the same stuff in the same markets that we operate in. So which means tomorrow, if you want to start an agency in Canada, we are fine, because Canada is not where we operate in, or at least currently operate in. The other also is in terms of good exits and bad exits, because typically, when you sell, in most cases, the company may reserve the right to ask you to leave the very next day, right? Which is fine. Obviously, you become an employee, but you may want to carve something out, saying, you know what, I'm quite critical to the business. So maybe I need at least a minimum 1-year period. Otherwise, even you as a buyer may not really benefit, right? Because we are a services business. So you may want to negotiate that. You may want to negotiate a two-way fair exit, meaning, look, as much as you can fire me or ask me to leave, I may also reserve the right to leave the organization. And there are two specific carve-outs you can negotiate, good and bad exits, which means that, for example, if I'm charged criminally, if I'm kind of convicted, that's obviously a bad exit, which means I suddenly lose all my rights to an earnout, right? It's all gone. But if it's a good exit, which means, you know what, I've done my handover, I'm just moving countries or I'm leaving, that's fine. So as long as someone else is running the business professionally, I, as the shareholder, should reserve the right to the earnout, right? So I think these are small nuances which could take 2-3 months to negotiate. But I would say, stand by your principles, stand what makes logical sense, because once you sign the line, once you sell, the deal's done, right? You can't really go back. The other thing, for example, you may want to negotiate very hard is the upfront amount, it can't be clawed back. Once paid, it's paid, right? I've seen a couple of cases where that wasn't the case, and that the founder of the company unfortunately went into litigation because the company wanted to claw it back for whatever reason, right? So I think these are things that you want to get that in writing upfront, and hence this takes time, and hence this takes a good law firm, because they need to have this experience, this precedence to be able to negotiate on your behalf.
I've heard it in North America. I'm not sure if it's the same in Singapore, but lawyers will refer to market. Well, that clause is not market. And that's what I think you're referring to, is someone with enough experience to be able to kind of push back and say, that's, like a 25-year non-compete is not market. Like that's not, that's
no,
not.
Absolutely spot on. I mean, we used to joke with our lawyer friend that, we're literally in the boardroom negotiating, but when the legal terms come, Rachit and I are just sitting, like an observer, like an audience, seeing the lawyers kind of fight it out. And over lunch, when we take a time break, I'm like, Mr. Lawyer, this doesn't seem legalese. This seems too, I'm just joking, the two teenagers fighting over, what they want. And as you rightly said, it literally, eventually, when all legalese failed, it came down to, hey, this is not market practice. But then the other one would say, hey, by the way, this is not what I see. And it's literally at the end, who would blink first, right? So, spot on. So having that gravitas, that experience, even their brand name, and I'll tell you something very small, and to founders here who I'm sure are very experienced, is it was really, really not about the legalese as much as about that posturing. Because because the other side, the bigger boys, they obviously have big, large global law firms. If they don't see a law firm on the other side which is of the similar caliber or pedigree, you've probably lost the battle before the battle begins, right? So yes, it's not easy because you may have to pay top dollars. But I think if you're going down this path, you rather get good advice, folks with good precedence and experience, and and the ability to kind of negotiate what market is, because we've seen it make a huge difference. We've probably taken 4 extra months to negotiate this, but we were finally very happy with the way the contract panned out.
Yeah, sounds like it. What was the emotional experience for you? You guys have been friends for a long time, and business partners and friends in life as well. You'd sold your business for a lot of money, but a 4-year earnout, so you're still sort of connected to the business and had a number to hit. What was the emotional side of selling like for you?
A roller coaster is the right word. Very draining is the other right word. So, it took 2 years. And in those 2 years, like I said, Rachit and I would need to grow the business, manage people, manage clients, manage revenue, the usual stuff that every founder has to do during the day. And then every evening or every few evenings, we would sit together and say, okay, where are we? Do we really want to sell? So we would literally start the conversation asking ourselves, are we ready? Are you really sure? And Rachit has this very good habit of kind of, even if I had said, yes, let's sell the last night, he would say, hey, let's sleep over it, right? You never know. So we would literally start from ground zero and kind of question our beliefs, our decisions. And it's hard because, you would get emails from the accountant saying, guys, I find this mistake in your due diligence. You know what? The valuation doesn't look that good. Or a buyer would come and say, nah, you know what? I don't think you guys are good enough. Posturing, actual stuff. So it's very draining because it does hurt your ego. That, I think we're doing good, but you have to grapple with so many things that you don't know about. So you've got to be prepared professionally to have these open-hearted conversations with your business partner. Because, by the way, there could be a phase when one party says, no, I'm not ready. The other party says, no, I want to sell, right?
Did that happen to you?
I think in our 12-year journey, we've actually had one major instance where, in fact, since you're from Canada, so one of our original partners, David, he's a Canadian Chinese. He at some point wanted to exit the business. And that was a very hard, it was just 4 years into our business. We knew little, but we learned the hard way that equity once given, it's a very difficult thing to part with, because how do you decide what's valuation? How do you kind of, once you agree, even if you do agree, how do you figure out cash? So we had a very difficult time in 2013, 2014 when we had to part ways, because A, it's emotionally difficult to part ways with a friend, who's a business partner. B, to figure out the cash and the valuation. So yes, we had gone through that. earlier in the decade.
How did you
But
do it with David?
Yeah, so it was tough. So I think once we came to an agreement that it's going to be that he is going to exit the business, the next step was, okay, what are the terms? And we were young and naive, so literally we went to Google.com. We read 20 articles. Obviously, the selling side had a lower valuation, the buying side had a higher valuation. But the funny thing is, when we reached a compromise, and now when we look back, it's funny. Back then, the valuation that we finally agreed on is not too far away from the final valuation of our deal. So at least in hindsight, we now feel that we had a fair deal. But what was tough was paying him back, right? Because obviously we had a fair value agreement, but we didn't have the cash flow. But we agreed on a time period of X months that we're going to pay you every month. We were just luckily our business grew. We had cash. But it was a struggle because we hardly took any money back, Rachit and I, after paying staff and after paying David. So yeah, you've got to go through that. I suppose many founders go through that. I guess the only caveat there to anyone listening is negotiate equity, in a prudent manner. Don't be too haste in kind of parting way with equity, because it's once you lock in, it's hard, right? Now, fast forward to the time when we're discussing the sale. There have been many occasions where Rachit wanted to sell, I didn't want to sell, or vice versa. And I'll add some more complexity to this. Is once Rachit and I are ready to sell, what people have to factor in is your family and friends. So when we spoke to our respective spouses and parents, it was a mixed bag. Like my parents and even Rachit's parents, they were like, so for them it's for people in our generation, the word exit has a positive connotation. But to our parents' generation, or I remember even Rachit's grandma, who lives in Singapore, the emotion was as though we were shutting a physical shop. So in Hindi, she would be like, wait, you're closing the shop. Like it sounded like the analogy was rather sad. Like, wow, what's happened to my grandson? Are things not going well? So we had to paint a positive picture that, no, you know what? An exit or a sale actually means money. So there's a grandma analogy. Then the parent analogy is, wait, kids, what are you going to do after selling? Like, you guys going to sit home? That's not fine. In most Indian households, and I'm sure in other households, sitting idle is never an answer. Doesn't matter how much money you make. So we had to go through that parental discussion saying, no, guys, look, we'll sell. We have an earn-out, so at least for 4 years we'll work. And by the way, I'm not saying we're going to sit idle at home. We'll do something. We'll figure out a next startup maybe. So it's those emotional. So suddenly if you add, it's not Rachit and me, there are 8 other people in the equation, spouses, parents, in-laws, grandparents. And you're like, wow, geez, this is not what I signed up for. But I mean, eventually when people, came around, they understood why. So I think we always went to, Simon Sinek's first principle of start with the why. So we wanted to tell them that, look, this liquidation event, there is liquidity, somewhere in our 30s, it will help us from a cash flow. Also, I think it will help us accelerate our business. It will help our staff. So I think when we started with the first principles of why and the objective of this, more than the mechanics, I think it kind of became a bit easier. But I mean, to anyone who's going down this path, expect anywhere between 6 to 24 months of late nights, of just emotional conflict internally as well as externally. It's not a rosy time till you actually cross that line. In fact, there's another anecdote I'll leave you with. A close friend of ours, he was at the finishing line on his way in his car to the hotel to sign the deal. But here's what happened. The buyer, and I presume this is a commonplace for shrewd buyers, the buyer calls and says, by the way, the deal's off the table. And the friend tells us that he said, I've only cried twice in my life. One when, there was a bereavement in the family. The other when this happened. Because, when you're all set, you probably, in excitement, booked a holiday, bought a house, but the buyer knows this. So again, as the saying goes, till the cash hits the bank, please don't celebrate. The deal is not done. Because what the buyer did, the buyer called back to us later because he knew the founder would be emotionally crushed. The buyer said, oh, by the way, you know what, we can do the deal, but at half the value. But I'm glad my friend, it's so unfair. Half the value, right? You've given 2 years to negotiate. You've come to an agreement of X. 1 hour before the party, you're ready to pop the champagne. they say half the value. I'm so glad my friend didn't sell at that point in time. He continued growing the business. Eventually, he sold it at a much higher value to a much better buyer. But yeah, all I'm going to say is, till the deal is done, in fact, in our case, just a funny anecdote, when we signed, all was good, we're celebrating, but because of a bank glitch, the money took an extra couple of hours to hit. But, in those 2 hours, your heart is pounding. You're like, I know I've signed it. I know the other side has shown us the receipt that, they've done their bit. But sometimes, banks take time, right, to kind of clear the transaction. But yeah, please celebrate only once the money is in your bank account.
How did you know the money was in your bank? Were you refreshing like a mobile bank app or?
Yes. Refresh fanatically. Absolutely. I would be lying if we didn't do so. Like Rachit's doing it, I'm doing it. Like, buddy, what's happening? Where's this? Because normally, you would get an SMS saying, money is in your bank. And they're like, oh. So we actually obviously have a screenshot of that SMS and, of that notification that, okay, money's in the bank. Let's go drink. But yeah. Till the money's in the bank, your heart's pounding that, what have I done?
Oh, man. I'm so grateful for you sharing in such candor and detail, because this is going to help a lot of entrepreneurs, in particular service companies that where oftentimes there's an earnout component, and you've just shared an enormous amount of really great tips for folks. So I'm really grateful for you doing that. Where can people reach you? Listeners wanted to reach out. Do you want to send people to a website, or what's the best way for folks to say hi and thank you personally?
No, firstly, I want to say thank you, John, for running this podcast. I think, I wish in hindsight, even, before our deal, we had access to this resource, because, it's only through these sort of conversations. And, I only had privy to 3 or 4 personal friends, but, many people may not be willing to share. But I think this is how the industry or the market, we got to build confidence and capability on the sell side as well. And so thank you for doing this, and thanks for everyone who's listening. And, happy to have detailed chats. Best way for anyone to reach me is on LinkedIn. So if you search my name, which I'm sure might be on the podcast as well, Prantik Mazumdar on LinkedIn, just drop me an invite or a note. And yeah, we can carry on the conversation from there. Really happy to kind of, deep dive and discuss specifics. And all I'll tell anyone at the end is really, you're building this, with so much hard effort, blood, time, etc. Be acquisition ready. Tell yourself after every meeting that you don't have to sell. There are tons of different business models. In the US or in the Western world, I see sites like Micro Acquire, if I'm not wrong, which are platforms that help you sell. There are advisors that you should reach out to. There are different kinds of private equity nowadays, SPACs, right? Different models emerging. So please entertain all sorts of options before signing on to the one that you kind of feel comfortable with, and fight for your upfront as much as possible, and negotiate the legal contract as well as you can, because this is once in a lifetime of an opportunity.
Well said. And we'll put your name, because it's got a unique spelling. So we'll put that in the show notes, which will be at builttosell.com. Prantik, it was awesome. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and wish you all the very best.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling, where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling. Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/built to sell or on Twitter at John Warrilow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.